So today we are jumping into the second way that we can simplify expressions. We've been working with combining like terms and just taking every term that is like and simplifying it down in the number of terms. And today we're going to talk about something called the distributive property. And when you hear the word distribute, we hear that in everyday language. It means to give. So if I were to distribute papers to you, I would be giving papers to you. So when we use this distributive property, we are giving the number or the variable on the outside of a set of parentheses to both of the numbers or variables on the inside of the parentheses. So that's what's being given, is whatever's sitting outside of the parentheses. And when we do this, obviously in math, we have a certain math operation we use, and that math operation is multiplication. And I'm just going to show you with a number sentence here why this works, because before we start tossing variables in it, mathematically, foundationally, this makes sense. So if you had something like this, 2 times, in parentheses, 5 plus 3, so far we've been using PEMDAS, and so we know we have to take parentheses first. 5 plus 3 gives me 8, and then I would multiply it by 2 to get a final answer of 16. What the distributive property tells us is that we could take that same expression, 2 times the quantity of 5 plus 3, but rather than do that parentheses first, we could actually do the distribution or distribute the 2 first. So if you take your 2 and multiply it by the 5, we get 10, and take the 2 and multiply it by the 3, we get 6, and if you add 10 and 6 together, we again get the answer of 16. So that's kind of the basics of the distributive property, and we'll look at what that looks like in algebra with variables tossed in it next. So below these fill in the blank sections are some examples of what this looks like. And you see an example similar to what I just showed you, but this time there's an x involved. But you see here in step 1, and they even draw arrows too, that the 5 is being given to the 4 and the x. And so step 2 would be to multiply, and they show you what that multiplication step looks like here. I wouldn't expect to see that on your paper. I'm okay from you just jumping from this step up here with the arrows down to what that simplification looks like. And step 3, it's important because it does say to simplify further if possible, and we will jump into some examples of that today where we might have to combine like terms after we do our distribution. Otherwise though, right here 20 plus 5x is our final answer. And the same thing is true down here with example 2. The only difference here is that the number outside our parentheses is a negative 2. And whenever you see that negative, again, you have to distribute the negative to whatever inside. And oftentimes you'll see something, and we'll see a couple examples earlier, where there's something even prior to this negative 2. And again, the negative or subtraction sign would go with the 2 as negative. Then we're going to multiply out and, of course, simplify again if possible. So there's a guided example down there for you just to see if you can fill in the blanks, and I'll walk you through it. But if we're starting with 4 and then in parentheses x plus 8, we're going to draw an arrow from our negative 4 just to represent that distribution that's happening. And so our multiplication step, and again, I don't need to see this every time, but you're going to take that negative 4 and multiply it by your x, and then you're going to take the negative 4 and multiply by the 8. That's just showing that the distribution means we are multiplying. And then, of course, step 3, we're just going to put it in simplest form. So negative 4 times x is just negative 4x. And then we're going to add that to negative 4 times 8, which is a negative 32. So that would be our final answer, negative 4x plus negative 32. There's nothing else we can combine, so that would be our final answer. So there are 4 more examples that I'd love for you to try. So if you can pause the video, go through and show your work, and then check back in, and we'll see if our answers match. So you see here that I drew my arrows in and have simplified each of these expressions. So I want you to take a second and just see how your answers compare to mine. Examples number 1 and 2 were pretty simple because they were both just positive integers just being multiplied in. Number 3 and number 4 I want to talk about quickly just because there's negative numbers involved, and we now see a lot of different signs, and so I wrote the expression the way you might have, but really this is a little messy with my double signs, and so we know that adding a negative really is just the same. We could keep it like this, but right here when we have subtracting a negative, we know that's the same as adding a positive. So oftentimes when I see a -8 and I'm distributing it to a -2, the simplest way to write this is -56x plus 16. And I want you to get in the habit of, instead of writing those two negative signs, just change the overall sign in general to make it simpler. So change that on your paper if you don't have that yet. But we got to step it up a notch. So if you see down below, there's this challenge piece, because now there is our second step. Right now we've just been distributing, but all of our directions have said that we might have to simplify. And the big key that we might have to simplify is if after the set of distribution in the parentheses there's another number, because this other 4 isn't part of the distribution. It wasn't inside the parentheses and therefore doesn't get what is being given. And so there at the end, step 3 is a simplification process. So you see that this -2 is distributed to the inside of the parentheses, and we see that down here, -6x plus 12. But that 4, and I'm going to use a different color here to just show that to you, that 4 stays the same here at the end. It just continues its placement down because it wasn't part of the distribution, and we don't see its completion until this step here, where we take the 12 and add it to the 4 to finally simplify this expression completely. So this challenge is really just taking both of these simplification skills that we've learned and combining them. Distributing everything first, that must be done first, and then once you have an expression with no parentheses in it, like this step here, you can combine your like terms like we've been practicing. So there are 2 final examples. There's actually 4 down below, but all I would like you to do is examples number 1 and number 3. And again, I'm going to ask if you pause the video and see what you can do on your own before checking in with me. So just complete numbers 1 and 3, pause the video now, and then check in a moment for your final answers. So you see here that I have gone through and distributed here in this first line of both of these problems, distributed the outside number to the inside to see my new expression. But then there is this final step 3, and I have highlighted in yellow the terms that I combined to get my final answer. So compare your answers to mine. That's all I'm going to ask that you complete for tomorrow. We're going to look at questions 2 and 4, because as you see, there's the piece there that says that these are a little trickier. There's something different about those, so we'll look at those together tomorrow. But just review and be sure that you can participate in class tomorrow based on these notes.